When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, there was a lot of talk about escalation. Russia was doing its nuclear saber rattling, and the West was taking it seriously. Every decision seemed to be based on one question: will this anger the Russians? And many options were ruled out for being potentially too escalatory. Not only was Russia declaring red lines, but we also kept drawing red lines for ourselves. There was no clear goal, much less a strategy. In particular, we couldn't bring ourselves to say that we want Ukraine to win and Russia to lose. In fact, it seemed like everyone was terrified of what would happen if Russia wasn't allowed to win. Instead, we adopted a salami tactic, or boiling the frog tactic. By incrementally providing a bit more, there is never any single big step that could cause a huge reaction. It's like going near the red line, then a bit closer. Surely, if we just let one toe cross it, that's not really a big deal. And if we can cross it just a little, maybe we can cross it a little bit more, and so on. So that's the theory, but did it work? Well, it kind of worked, in the sense that there was no big escalation, so that's good. But there are two things that are worth asking. First, was there really a risk in the first place? Was there really a red line, or was it a bluff, and Russia was just trying to scare us? Maybe salaming was never actually necessary. Of course, we'll probably never know for sure how an alternate scenario might have played out, but it's worth asking the question: what if we mostly deterred ourselves? The second question is what the cost was. Well, let me ask it in a different way. Is it the case that we achieved the objectives while avoiding the potential downside? Did we manage to have our cake and eat it too? To stretch the metaphor a little, is it possible that we were so slow that the cake rotted and we just ended up getting food poisoning? So, what is the end result, at least so far, after 3 years? One answer is that we did eventually give Ukraine more and more help. After a while, we gave them artillery and air defense. We eventually gave them tanks, which was a big struggle. We eventually gave them fighter jets, which was an even bigger struggle. They got long range, or at least longish range strike capabilities, but they were not allowed to target internationally recognized Russian territory. Then they were allowed to strike a specific and limited area of Russian territory. Each time Ukraine was nearing defeat, we gave them a bit more. Effectively, we gave them just enough to barely keep them alive, and that's the, quote, good news, I guess. But what about the bad news? Well, the obvious negative effect is that more Ukrainians died, but I think there is a deeper and even worse downside. The war has dragged out for much longer than necessary, and again, that translates to more dead Ukrainians, more cities leveled, and so on. But that's not what I want to focus on. By dragging everything out, we have allowed other countries to implement their own salami tactics, such as China. Iran and North Korea eventually got involved as well. We even reached the point where North Korea is actively sending soldiers to fight Ukraine. And we're talking about the regular North Korean army here, not random volunteers. But I think there is one aspect that might be the most dangerous of all. Imagine if Russia had been stopped early. For example, imagine Ukraine had been given all the weapons and equipment they could possibly need. The earlier it would have been clear that the invasion would not succeed, the lower the cost would have been. For both sides, of course, but I mean the cost for Russia in particular. Putin could have pulled out and made up some story about how they actually achieved their main objectives. Whatever. Who's gonna argue? But now the situation looks very different. Now they have paid a huge price. Losing now would be infinitely more devastating. So what we effectively did was to say to Russia, hey, don't give up now, you can still win. You still have a chance, just hang in there. If you just try a little harder, you can still make it, and the sacrifice won't have been in vain. It's like we lured them into the sunk cost fallacy. And it's not just that Putin would now have a hard time explaining why they fought a war for 3 years and suffered hundreds of thousands of casualties with nothing to show for it. During this time, the public has become invested as well. There is a part of the population that has swallowed all the propaganda and is demanding victory. They want to go all in. If anything, they're angry that the war is not being fought more effectively. So if we look back at how the situation has developed, it seems perfectly plausible to say that while trying to avoid World War III, we ended up making it more likely.